Hello, everybody. As you may have noticed, we had to take a week off. The reason being that we lost one of our dearest and oldest friends. Dr. Alyssa Locketts was taken from us about a week and a half ago when we're recording this, October 14th. She was one of the best people I've ever known. She was such an incredible light. The smartest person I've ever known, one of the funniest people I've ever known. She just was an absolute joy to know. She was a dear friend of all three of ours. She was a sister to me for almost a quarter of a century. And so we're going to do a little toast to start the episode off.
To Alyssa.
To Alyssa.
To Alyssa.
I love you, and I miss you, and I'll miss you for the rest of my life.
Parts of the conversation we're going to have later about Between Two Fires, but I love creation stories. It's obviously was a big part of my childhood in Genesis, but
yeah.
I've always really enjoyed.
They're a lot of fun.
Yeah,
so
and
fun.
there's a lot of beautiful symbolism in them. There's a lot going on across different
really
cultures.
Creativity too, in a lot.
Absolutely,
of them.
but I
No
came
pun
across
intended.
I came across one that was recently that was new to me and really beautiful and evocative. So I wanted to share it with you guys. So I'll just get going. Yeah. So in the beginning, there was a vortex of chaos, all mixed slowly together, and everything was a blur. One day, a large egg appeared in the center of the chaos. For a long time, the egg continued to shake. Eventually, the vortex stopped, and the egg broke. The absolute god, Aus, was born. Aus. The scattered fragments of the egg transformed into giants and attacked the newly born Aus. However, Aus quickly grew and continuously defeated the giants. At last, after a fierce battle, Aus defeated all the giants, and the wounded Aus created an alternate self. As the left and right side of Aus's body were different, it created two selves. Aus gathered the body of the defeated giants and poured its blood into them. From the one...
Wait, who's its blood?
Aus's blood.
But the left or right version.
So he's different on either side.
Yeah.
And then there's all the giants, and he pours his blood into the giants.
Out of his new self or his old self?
So he's made a new self, and the new self resembles the two halves of his self.
But from the original self, he pours blood.
And from the original self, he pours blood.
So it's almost like a third iteration.
Yes. And I don't know what these giants are, but they're giants.
Well, they're eggshells.
From the one who resembled his left poured out light, so Aus named it Aya, the god of light. From the one who resembled his right poured out darkness, so Aus named it Ea, the god of darkness. To the two, Aus commanded that the world be filled with people and fell into a deep slumber. Although Aya and Ea were different in appearance, they loved one another, were joined, and had many children. However, there existed no world, and their frail children, who had nowhere to go, died one after the other. Though overcome with grief and sadness, Aya and Ea thought of creating a world where they could all live healthy and prosperous lives. Ea and Ea created their children Re, the god of eyes, Ai, the god of heart, and Hai, the god of voice. When Re opened his eyes, everything that was there appeared. There was now contour and color in the world. And when Ai wished for it, everything that was there could be felt. A sense of calm spread. And when Hai shouted, everything that was there trembled. A blessed timbre began to resonate. To the three, Ea and Ea gave the seed of life and told them to nurture it. The three gathered in a circle and prayed, and the seed sprouted. The sprout quickly grew and became the giant tree of life. However, the tree continued to grow, soon filling the entire world, and no one was able to move. The three asked Father Aya and Mother Ea to help. Ea and Aya joined once again, and they had 3 children. The god of the sky, Rayquaza, the god of the earth, Groudon, and the god of the ocean, Kyogre, were born.
These are now Pokemon. This has gone Pokemon.
Rayquaza wrapped its body around the tree of life. Groudon and Kyogre slammed their bodies into the tree of life. Eventually, the tree fell and broke into 3 pieces. Ray, Ea, and Hai prayed at sat under
Are you
the
just
tree.
making this shit up?
No.
This sounds like if Gene Wolfe had written a shonen manga.
Yes. Saying that the tree would rot away like this, then the pieces of the broken tree would transform to the sky, earth, and ocean. So, so Rayquaza became the pillar that holds the sky. The shadow that reached into the heavens became the 3 gods that sustained the sky, Kairu, Capagon, and Bangaris. And the air filled the sky, the stars sparkled. Groudon became the land that covers the earth. The roar of the diving land became the 3 gods that sustained the earth, Dabu, San, and Gudon. The earth shook and the mountains stirred. Kyogre became the veins of the water that embraced the oceans. The ripples that disappeared into the seas became the 3 gods who sustained the ocean, Latios, Metagross, and Latios.
Metagross is a Pokemon. Metagross is actually a Pokemon.
The ocean was filled with water and the waves whispered. Thus the world was born. Aya and Ea and the various gods were very pleased with this and filled the world with their children. That peaceful world was a paradise for the children of God. The children of God would continue to multiply. Through that, worlds would change little by little. Over time, the gods began to call those who lived in the world by 2 names. The children of God who resembled the great father Aya would be called Pokemon. The children of God who resembled the great mother Ea were called humans. The absolute God Aus will soon awaken, and seeing the world filled with his descendants will promise great abundance and prosperity. That is the creation story of the Pokemon universe.
That's incredible.
I totally picked up on it.
You did. You nailed it, dude.
You nailed it. Yeah.
I mean, it had me at Kyogre.
I know. Yeah. I was like, these are Pokemon. Wait.
Metagross is a Pokemon.
That's
Yes.
awesome. Well, I mean, I believe it. It sounds good to me.
It's
Sounds
true.
Totally reasonable.
I am stunned.
That was awesome. You picked up on that right away.
About
It
a week and a half ago, the Nintendo and Game Freak and all them had a major data leak, and that was part of it. The revelation.
Oh no! Now they know.
That's
Shit,
amazing.
they weren't supposed to find out.
There was
how
also
the
lots
world
of like
came to be.
scrapped Pokemon in the leak. There were also some like other very weird Pokemon mythology that may come up in later episodes, with some very like Greek myth Pokemon stories, which are in the
That's sick.
uncomfortable.
I immediately thought of it when you said that the egg was shaking, because I'm like,
I know
that's the thing that you waited for hours for. Just like you're walking
The
around in
eggs-
circles.
the
I just want
eggs
my
hatching.
egg, and it's like, oh, it moved. Nothing happened, and then
Yeah.
you would just wait for it to hatch and birth. Ouse.
Nope, that's the absolute god Aus.
Incredible.
So I don't know if there'll be a revelation in a future game here soon, but
He had to fight his eggshell.
he had to fight giants.
but his eggshell.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Incredible.
Wow.
Hello, Michael Vannon. Welcome to Under Towers Podcast. My name is Steven,
I'm Daniel.
I'm Sam.
and we have a phenomenal episode for you this evening. We're going to be talking about Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. You've heard us mention this book several times. We read it. We're going to discuss it. We're going to have a spoiler light discussion and then probably a pretty spoiler heavy discussion, as we normally do with our deep dives.
Yes.
But before we get into that, a word from our sponsors.
Let me pull that right back up. Okay. We've all had moments when dealing with former loved ones, girlfriends, boyfriends, husbands, and wives. The process of breaking up is both challenging and fraught with perils. That's where excommunication, former lovers mediators, steps in.
Excommunication.
It takes a deft hand to navigate the emotional landmines that present themselves. You need them out of your lives, but you also need them to pick up their stuff. Excommunication can be the answer in a dark time. You upload your desires to the cloud. XCOM blocks them on all social media for you and mails them anonymous letters revealing your desires.
This is like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, but now.
Basically. For an additional fee, on-hand team members can block their visage using our sheets. I think like bed sheets that they just like hold up.
Patented. No one else can do this.
Excommunication former lovers mediators will blot out the sunshine of your former love and bring you the peace of mind you're so desperately looking for. So thanks to them for sponsoring the show.
Thank you, Excommunication. And as always, code Under Towers for 10% off your first Excommunication.
Yes.
That was great. That was brilliant. All right, so
patented sheets.
Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. I believe the second book that Mr. Buehlman wrote.
Yes, I think Those Across the River.
Those Across the River is his first one. I've also read that one, and it is phenomenal.
Nice.
It's been out long enough. It's a werewolf book with also some kind of historical elements. It's set post World War I in the South.
Nice.
It's a great
US?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, a U.S. veteran returns home kind of story. Between Two Fires is the first book of Buehlman's that I read. It was originally published in 2012. It was published by Ace. I'm going to double check myself here, but I believe that was the name of the publisher. Yeah, Ace Books. It's a phenomenal book. I love it very much. For whatever reason, it did not reach the same level of success in its first publication as some of his other horror novels did. It is definitely a horror book, but it has just as many elements of historical fiction and fantasy in it as well. So it just didn't connect at the time. And what's interesting is that it had sold few enough that he was able to get the rights back himself.
Interesting.
So this copy with this absolutely sick cover.
It's a much better cover than the other one, too.
It's so much better cover than the other one. This is essentially a self-published book that he was putting out through Amazon.
Oh, nice.
And then I think that I and a lot of other people kind of discovered it for the first time via Reddit around the time of the pandemic.
Interesting.
And now would be a good time, I guess, to say, but Between Two Fires is set in the Black Plague in
1348.
France. And so it's about 2 years into the plague. It's after the start of the 100 Years' War, and we follow Thomas, who is a disgraced French knight who rescues a young girl. That something's weird about her, and she insists on traveling to Avignon to meet the Pope. And Thomas reluctantly follows and protects her. So it's set during the plague, and I suspect that that's partly why it started gaining popularity again.
Sure.
Or at least people started reading it again during the pandemic. I thought it was a pretty wild piece of perspective on what we were going through.
Sure.
And
definitely sets the tone for a good read.
Yeah, it made it extra chilling at the time, but it also was like, oh, as horrible as this is, like, we're not losing.
It's not the Black Plague.
A third to 2/3 of our population
in
every major city center. But yeah, and since then, Christopher Buehlman's star is rising. We're going to be reading his two fantasy books in the coming months, The Black Tongue Thief and The Daughter's War. And because of those are published by Tor, he's being published by Tor now, and people have been really flocking to Between Two Fires, being the most fantastical of his horror books. Wanting that trying to scratch that Christopher Buehlman fantasy itch. Another couple interesting things about Buehlman before we dive straight into the book. He studied French in college, so he's fairly fluent in French, and he was already pretty familiar with French history before writing this. And the thing is chock full. I mean, if you took the fantastic elements out, you could say that this was just a very, as far as I know, very historically accurate, historical fiction tale.
Yeah.
And he also does a great job of tweaking the language to, even though you're reading it in English, obviously it sounds like they're speaking as French people would speak, the cursing specifically.
Oh, really? That's really.
That's
good
why
to know.
it's whoring and cunting.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Is
more. Why are we saying that?
Is more of a direct translation of French cursing rather than fuck or shit or
Yeah.
It's just different.
French are
it's
getting,
different words.
getting really weird with their swearing.
Yeah, well, it's very French. And another fun thing is that Christopher Buehlman, I'm not sure which direction he would say is his full-time job now, or if it still is both. But he has for a very long time. One of his main gigs has been traveling around the country to various Renaissance festivals as a performer. I believe his name is Christoph the Insulter, and he performs in front of crowds at Ren fairs, and you can pay him, and he will just tear your buddies to shreds.
Just insult you.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
just mocking people, and all in fun, and it's you can tell him things that are off limits or whatever, but that sounds like a fun job. Having worked at a Renaissance festival for a year, Daniel and I were in a play at a Renaissance festival here in Middle Tennessee. That sounds like a fun gig.
I think so.
I want to go to see him now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I think that
Have
would be
him
a lot of
insult
fun.
one of us.
Well, we're definitely going to try to get him on the pod, and so maybe we'll see if he's going to be coming anywhere near.
Do the persona on a Zoom call.
Just rip us.
All right. We've invited 2 guests tonight. One is you, Mr. Buehlman. The other is Mr. Insulter.
Wow.
So all of that kind of preparatory discussion aside, I thought in an interview that I listened to that Christopher Buehlman did specifically about Between Two Fires, his kind of elevator pitch for the book I thought was very interesting. And he said that the idea that sparked all of this was kind of like, what if the apocalypse from Revelation actually happened already?
Yeah.
And it
okay.
happened in Europe during the Black Death. And so the events of this book are essentially that the culmination of that end times, which if you put yourself in the shoes of someone living at the time,
Felt like the end, yeah.
I think it would be kind
Sure.
of hard to not see it as that apocalyptic of a moment.
Sure.
I wanted to kind of start off our discussion by reading the first of the kind of biblical passages.
Yeah.
One thing I love about this book, it's split up in chapters, obviously, but in parts, and each part is started with a section that is he wrote brilliantly. It sounds exactly like Scripture, kind of detailing what is going on in the heavens and in hell while all this is happening on earth. Now in these days the Lord God had turned his face from the business of men, and the angels who had remained loyal to him said to one another, "We must look after the children of Adam," and they did so as best as they could. Now also the third part of the angels who had rebelled looked upon the earth and saw the hand of God withdrawn from it, and the air was cold in the valleys of men, and the sea was also cold. And one of the fallen angels, whose name was Uziel, said, "It was for man's sake that we were cast down, for we would not bend our knee to him. Let us test the Lord and see what he will do if we afflict their mightiest kingdoms with hunger. And this angel rose from the waters of the sea and made rain, and the spikes of wheat and the ears of barley were heavy with that rain, and they fell into the mud, or withered, or went to rot, and the livestock were made sick, and they died in great numbers. And in their turn the children of Adam knew hunger, and men devoured all there was, and there was no more. And many died, and some would go into the dead yard and eat of the newly buried. And the babes born during those years who lived to be children had only 22 teeth. And the Lord made no answer. Now another of the fallen, whose name was Belial, said, It was for man's sake that the war began in heaven. So let us try them with wars in their greatest kingdoms. And he rose through the wells of a king who ruled a mighty island, and blew pride into his mouth. And when this king spoke, he swore that he would have the crown of an even greater kingdom, which he would take with the sword. And so he came upon his neighbor's shore under arms and with banners. Now the greater king, seeing that his land was in peril, sent out a mighty host in armor of iron and silver, and they rode against the men of the island, who shot them with arrows, even through their armor, and they died. And so the long war began, and the Lord made no answer. So it came that the first among the fallen, whose name was Lucifer, said, Our old enemy sleeps. If we do not seize this hour, we will come to the end of days, as he has written them, and he will grind us under his heel and destroy us forever. Let us rise against him now in all our numbers, and pull the walls of heaven down, and shake out the souls of the just, and let us seize our brother angels by the throat and cast them down into hell, and let us live as once we did upon the great height. But some were fearful of the power of the angels of God, whose numbers were greater, and whose generals were Uriel and Gabriel and Michael, who had broken the back of Lucifer, and sent him into the hot coals in the belly of the earth, to blacken his face with soot, and know he was lower than the Lord. And some were fearful that God would wake from his drowsiness, and rack them with pains and fires. Even they had not learned to endure, or destroy them utterly. And the first among the fallen spoke to them, saying, Then let us test him one more time. It is for man's sake that we were insulted, for his sake that we were driven out, and for his peace that we are mortared under. Let us break the roof of hell with our fists, and murder the seed of Adam. For if God will not rouse himself to save his favorite creature, his sleep is deep, and we may catch him by the hair and cast him down. And one of the fallen, whose name was Azazel, said, Shall we kill them with fire or with cold? And Lucifer spoke to him, saying, Neither of these. What then? Said the wicked angel. With a great plague, answered Lucifer. And so it was. And the years that had passed since the Lord had come to be born among men were 1,348. So one thing I love about that passage, besides setting up the kind of biblical nature of this story, and how the entire story is going to be rooted in that Christian biblical mythology, is it also gives a fairly good and brief, concise little history lesson too, because before the plagues hit Europe, there was a period of near constant rain that drowned the fields, and it's kind of not what you would expect something like this from a drought, but there was so much rain that my understanding is that the crops and livestock died. It all flooded and rotted, and the results were the same. It was just kind of the reverse thing.
Just everything's wet.
Everything is wet, which I'm sure contributed to an environment that was ripe for sickness.
Sure.
And then, of course, it references the beginning of the 100 Years' War, and specifically references the Battle of Crécy, which we hear about more later in the story. But it's such a fascinating period of human history. I highly recommend the last podcast on the Left's series about the Black Death. It's a five episode series. They do a serious deep dive on that whole period of history, and worst time to be alive, I think.
Also,
the 14th
crazy
century.
if you stayed alive.
Yeah.
Kind of a miracle if you were even alive
for
the whole thing.
The 1300s were I think pretty much the worst time to be a human.
I think I remember reading about a year 400 something that may be the single worst year to be alive. Obviously, this spread out over a longer time, which would also be worse. But basically, there was a volcanic eruption that caused massive cloud cover that also caused crops to die and all that stuff. And also, there was just this like, for ancient peoples too, you're like the sun's gone. It's like this whole like, and then there were some plagues too. So it's about. So I remember reading about that. I wish I could recall the year, but for 1 year they were like, that's probably it. But I think if you span out the time to something longer, I think this is probably it.
Yeah,
I guess that we have good histories of.
Right. You kind of spread that out for half a century or more.
Sure. Was it 50 years of the plague?
No, but I think all of the previous stuff, if you just take everything into account from the crops dying and the starvation, and then the 100 Years' War and the Black Death, you have the 14th century. Yeah. Was just terrible because there was waves of the plague too. It wasn't just one event.
Right.
I don't know that it was ever worse.
Does anybody have plague still? Like,
oh yeah.
Like, why don't we get like vaccine shots? Like, you got flu shot, you got plague shot.
I think it's just an antibiotic.
That just kind of has crushed it.
Yeah, but it's Yersinia pesta, I believe, is the name of the bacteria or the critter that causes it. Mm-hmm. Or maybe that's the flea that transports it. I'm blanking on the specifics, the sciencey bits. But it's very much
right. Rats.
Well, there's so it was transported by fleas. Rats are the most obvious and common answer to where those fleas came from, but there is a significant amount of evidence that it actually came from hamsters.
Really?
And then potentially a place that we still find it is this one type of marmot that lives in the steppes. Okay. And so there is, I think the accepted belief of how it spread was that these marmots gave it to the Mongols, who then, as they started invading Europe, they ended up contracting it themselves, the Mongol army. Yeah. And when they couldn't get into Vienna, I think, they started lobbing infected bodies over into the city.
Oh, nice.
And then as people were fleeing the Mongols and leaving Vienna, and merchants were leaving, it started to then spread. And you would have ships arriving into other ports that were full of dead people, or maybe a couple of survivors and
of the plague.
Mm-hmm. And then you have rats and other critters with fleas getting it from the bodies, and you just started to spread like literal wildfire. Yeah. And you had several different variants of it. You had the one, I'm not gonna even try to say the names.
Right. Plague 1, Plague 2.
You had the one that would give you boils, and that was, I think, the one that had like a 60% mortality rate, and that's the one that you would hope that you got.
Because you can come back from it, kind of.
Well, if you have a 40% chance of living.
So, not the greatest.
So you're
odds.
telling me there's a chance.
Yeah.
And then there was the one that I may be flopping the symptoms for these, but there was the one where I think your skin would turn black, and that was like a 90% mortality rate. And then there was one where you're coughing blood, and that was essentially 100%. And there was a version of the plague that it was not as widespread as far as we know, because it was extremely fast acting. Like within a day, you're dead. It just kind of liquefied your insides. And and it had 100% mortality rate. So like if that version came into a village, that entire village, every man, woman, and child in that village was dead in a day. And so that didn't spread as far as we know. But apparently, I guess the accepted wisdom has been that a third of Europe died from the plague. But because of recent advances in technology, they're finding like mass graves. They're finding abandoned, overgrown villages that just die. Everybody died. And so they're now contemplating upwards of 2/3 of everyone in Europe died.
Yeah.
I know this ties in with Black Tongue Thief, or I'm sorry, Between Two Fires. I think did we do the, I don't think on our trip we did the Catacombs tour in Paris. Did you do that?
We did Catacombs in Rome, I think, but we didn't do any in Paris.
So in Paris, you can take tours of this, but there's catacombs that were originally mines that they got stone for all of the construction of the city. And during the plague, they had so many bodies in Paris specifically that they didn't have anywhere to bury them anymore.
Yeah.
And so they started cremating these bodies, and then monks were taking them down into what they were creating catacombs, and stacking the bones and doing it in as reverential a way as possible and being as organized. But I've walked through there twice, and there's millions of people. I may be exaggerating. I don't think I am. It's an unbelievable, hard to communicate how many people it is, and
skeletons.
It's chilling. I mean, they're not like the bones are stacked in neat piles with like patterns throughout them. They tried to be as artistic with it as possible in memory of these people, but there's just rows of skulls. And, you're walking through and like each one of these was a person with hopes and fears and dreams, and this thing ripped through and killed all of them. So a truly miserable time, and that's the backdrop for this story. So this was my second time reading it. This is your guys' first times.
Yeah.
I've been hogging the mic. Initial thoughts before we do a kind of a spoilery deep dive.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When I first read it, I had not done any sort of backstory, and I suddenly thought it wasn't a historical fiction, but rather a futuristic fiction with a resurgence of the Black Plague, like kind of Gene Wolfe, like on top of like an ancient history of like somebody's going to pop out a laser gun.
Okay.
Anyways, I was like, this is crazy, like reading it, and then realized, quickly it was actually 1348 from the, very intro. But I did have a feeling like, what if this was way in the future?
Nice.
Yeah, and I got excited, but it's still interesting.
Very kind of Canticle for Leibowitz.
Yes.
Yeah, or just in a galaxy far, far away at the beginning rather than this is 1348.
No, I had a lot of fun reading it. Obviously, it's really intense in points. It's also a book like there's not not much actually happens, but there's a lot of threat of sexual violence. So it's something like not for you if that's something you can't stomach. Obviously,
definitely.
I don't know if I can stomach it, but you get
Right.
you get through it.
I'm good with threats of sexual
pretty
violence.
awful.
It's worth noting that it stays threats.
It does. That's what I mean. It doesn't. They're actually, spoiler warning. There is no rape in this book, but there's lots of threatened rape. Yeah. So, and one instance is a lot worse than the others. Yeah. But overall, I enjoyed reading it. I feel like he writes action really well. And there are several set pieces he does really well. There's a lot of interesting horror elements. I've not read a lot of horror, so it translates different than film, but he sets an awful scene in a really interesting way. And then there's some interesting ideas in this book as you end up getting to the end of it, and kind of I think he's making some interesting arguments for sure.
That was going to be a question I had for you guys, because when I found this book, it was when I kind of was starting to get serious about reading horror literature outside of some of the classics that I had always enjoyed, like Frankenstein and Dracula, Lord of the Flies, things like that.
Yeah.
Since reading this, I've read quite a few horror novels, but this was kind of the start of that journey for me. Have you guys read much? I know we haven't as
To
a
be honest,
club. We haven't read any, but
I did not even realize this was horror till right now.
okay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not. It's
Yeah.
not in the same way as like,
Stephen King
or
It,
something.
like,
Sure.
But it's
it was such a fantasy story for me, and I guess, I mean, it reminds me of The Road and Last of Us, which I guess are technically horror, but that
Yeah,
just
I think that's fair.
some of the tropes in it just totally. I'd be like, oh, this is Denzel Washington Man on Fire story.
sure,
Like,
100%.
not horror. I would go more towards action adventure, like thinking, or fantasy, like almost sword and sorcery kind of. Without
It is
any
It
of
is
that,
actually very
except
it's
because
also
of the magical, like celestial sort of divinity sort of thing, and it just felt like Faithful and Fallen so much too. That I
Sure.
was like,
it's a series of interlinking short stories also with a through line, but
yeah,
it's much
monsters here, creepy monster made
yeah.
of people.
And there's
faces.
obviously a place they're going, but the journey is the only through line, and obviously the character's development.
And maybe
but
just like the whole like monsters made of people's faces is so normal now for us because we read Berserk. It's like, of course their face is gonna be like half a fucked up baby for sure.
When I first read this, all of the demons felt very Hieronymus Bosch, the painter. That was where my mind went the first time through, and I definitely still felt that. But I have to imagine that Christopher is a Berserk fan, because on this second read through, so many of the descriptions of the demons and monstrous creatures were very Kentaro Miura.
Immediately just pictured all those.
The
it's interesting.
horse with human mouths for eyes and
yeah.
hands for feet, and it's like there's definitely Bosch is still in there, but that's also very Berserk.
Yeah.
I think that I include horror as kind of the third great taste that tastes great together with sci-fi and fantasy, where we've discussed they're not the distinction between science fiction and fantasy is kind of blurry. I don't think that horror is not blurry in that way. I just think that it fits so well with either of those genres that
sometimes it when you put it with those genres, it is a little like blurred. Like
it's not like Alien, a slasher or something. Yes, like Alien.
It's very intellectual.
Alien is my favorite horror movie, but you could also classify it very much as a science fiction film. So
sci-fi horror thriller.
Yeah.
Whatever.
But I love it kind of ticked every horror box for me, because I'm not a huge fan of things like slasher films or anything like that. I like the more psychological elements, and definitely coming from the church background that we did, I really appreciate a good like spiritual horror story.
Yeah, I mean, our church put on horror plays.
Oh,
we did
were
the
you
Crucible,
guys?
right?
Were you guys there? Well, I was thinking.
Some of them were horrible,
but were you guys there for the night that I think it was one of the things that ended up getting Pastor Matt fired, but.
When he blended up a goldfish?
We're blending up the goldfish, but then there was the one night that he had invited some other youth group to come over, and they did the play about everybody appearing before the throne of God at the day of judgment, and they poured ketchup all over their hands in the dark when people couldn't see, and they just started screaming about having the blood of all these people that they didn't preach to on their hands.
I do not remember
that. Is awesome.
It happened.
I wish I had come up with that play idea.
No, it was very traumatizing.
I didn't proselytize.
Yeah. Yeah. They had their hands were covered in blood of all the people that they didn't save.
God.
And it was like, holy shit. Not well enough produced for me to say it was metal. But it was something.
They were doing this in person, or did they video this?
Yeah, no, it was in person, man. They were because they were spread out. They were spread out in all the seats and everything. So you're just sitting there, and all of a sudden somebody's popping up next to you, just screaming bloody murder, because their hands are covered. Yeah.
I don't know if I was there.
You must not have been because it 100% happened.
Because I do not remember that.
Man.
Yeah. So
Maybe
if-
I blocked it out, but
if that happened today.
yeah. So some Christian horror. That's
I
some
might
spiritual
have been
horror
on
is great.
Yeah.
might have been out of town.
I mean,
or something.
honestly,
maybe.
Fire and Brimstone is just Christian horror. Like,
Sure.
It
Oh,
absolutely
for
is.
sure.
Gnashing of
Quite
teeth.
literally.
I mean, even I don't want to get into spoilers, but like the hit when they talk about hell, like
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I ripped my skin off, dragged it, and then had to sew it back on. But I had all these gravel bits in it. Like what?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
that would be in a sermon illustration. You know, that's what hell's like.
Yeah.
Better
So-
proselytize.
You mentioned the fight scenes. Another little tidbit about Buellman is I think he's a member of the SAFD, which is the Society of American Fight Directors.
Yeah.
So he has a familiarity with crafting sword fights,
Mm-hmm.
which
That's fun.
definitely reads. You can tell Tomas specifically has definitely familiarity with his familiarity with his weapon feels very authentic. So you talked about you mentioned tropes, Sam. This is another thing. If you go back to our tropes episode, this book for me hits like it hits quite a few of the tropes that I mentioned as loving. Like it definitely has the old man reluctantly becoming a father figure and changing for the better. Definitely has the found family thing. I love as the book progresses the kind of gay dads situation with Tomas and Per Matthew kind of becoming both different father figures.
Well, one is actually gay, right?
Right,
So, yeah.
right, but
Or is he a pederast?
Yeah, well, yeah, he's
Because he sleeps with a boy.
It
says he's a boy.
It does, but it also says he's a boy that's sleeping around with a bunch of other people. So my interpretation was not like child boy, but like
that bothered me.
He is like a priest, so
just the use of boy there was like, oh man, please give me a little more like.
it felt intentional. Yeah.
Are we 12? Are we 14? Are we? What are we? What are we?
I think
I
he
mean,
was
back
like,
then it was
what are
like
we
if you
doing?
were alive, Like,
Oh my god, that was the one thing I was like.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't think it
when
was
the stakes are death, or
Yeah,
things get weird.
I don't think it was that. I think he was a young adult that was
Mike.
of the more,
yeah,
the
I
more
mean,
boyish
sure.
persuasion.
It was consensual, right?
but
Mike,
was
I just
around.
wish we had a little more specificity in language there because it was just it rubbed me the wrong way just slightly, but
sure. Just understandably
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
That's an okay thing
reason.
Yeah.
to be
Wait,
upset about
but
something.
that's
What are
fascinating.
we-
That
what are we doing here?
it's like one of your favorite tropes. Didn't you not like that trope?
Which
Found
one?
Found Family?
No, I don't.
No,
I don't have an
not
as
that one. I think we all like the found.
no,
family
I don't
trope.
like reluctant hero for the most part. Tomas mostly gets off his butt pretty quickly, so it's okay. He definitely hems and haws more than I. I'm like, come on, man! Like we know you're gonna do it. Stop whining. But overall, I like.
Yeah.
I'm just like it's just you're just being a little baby.
It's like
just-
so on brand but annoying too. Like,
Yeah. And that being said, it didn't bother me that much. And honestly, it just should have happened. I just felt like it should have happened just a smidge earlier. But there's like a point where when he's finally on board, it just kind of like goes away. And it's like I felt like the book locked into place once he was griping with Delphine a lot less because it's like the griping is like, dude, come on, I get it.
Well,
Like,
that leads to a trope that I don't like, which is the whole like damsel thing. I don't like
Sure.
the damsel in distress thing. And Delphine was not so much a damsel, but just like a little girl, like, oh, and it would be
Yeah, it
like, and she
didn't
mewed about this, and like she was upset about these things, like the whole like holier than thou type thing. But it did make up for itself in the end with like what happens to her later.
Yeah.
well, yeah, for sure.
All of that, and realizing kind of what she is also helps with that too. But it is funny to see the tropes from the front and be like, here
So
we go.
I don't know if I'm thick, but I listened to somebody talking about this book, and they were like, you can tell what's going to happen with Delphine or what's going on with her in the first 2 chapters if you read closely. And
Well, shall we get into?
we can
some
do that.
spoilery?
Yeah.
Okay, so warning from here on out. we've let loose some minor spoilers as we go along that I don't think that you would really get until you've read the story. But from now on out, we're going to be doing a little bit more of a deep dive. I picked up on some stuff. It's an exaggeration to say it's in the first couple of chapters.
That's what. Well, and I
picked up on it on these last read throughs. So when I'll point this out when we get to it. There's a moment when Delphine Tomas is asleep. It's before he's going to have his first big fight of the book against the river monster.
The river thing.
That was
Delphine,
actually so awesome.
Yeah,
it's a great
Delphine takes out his sword while he's asleep because she wants to clean it for him.
Yes, I do remember this.
And she's only 10 or whatever, and so she's not physically capable of handling a large man's sword, and she cuts her hand,
right,
and her blood gets on the end of the sword.
Right.
There's a moment later when he's preparing for the night tournament, the NIGHT tournament. At that turns out it's the
Court of the Damned or whatever.
The dead castle.
Mm-hmm.
And his armor is being fixed up. What we later find out is, a zombified demonic armorer starts to open his sword and closes it, and it sheathes it again really quickly. And it's like, what the hell's on this? And you kind of assume on the first read through, I think, that he's referring to the nasty, disgusting ichor blood from the river monster.
Right.
When really it's Delphine's blood.
Sure.
And this kind of savior figure blood on this sword that's never been cleaned off.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he kills the river monster with with a sword. So, maybe that's what they were referring to, but that certainly
that's not the first couple of chapters. She's obviously talking to angels. That's revealed right away.
But
so she's special. But basically, she's got Jesus living inside of her.
I thought she was like a Joan of Arc kind of character.
Her whole vibe did. When I first met her, I'm trying to figure out what's she gonna do. I'm like, okay. In the first introduction of her, just based on tropes and everything I've seen before, I was like, this girl is probably going to be the key to defeating evil.
Sure.
And that's just what you expect.
And if that's where you're headed,
I do feel
like
that
in this character,
immediately.
I was just expecting when I listened back to it once they said that, and I was like, and maybe again I just missed it.
Also
but
because
I was like,
played The Last of Us. I'm like,
sure.
Okay,
right.
This is a girl that's
which
like
came
her
out
destiny.
after, and I do wonder.
Well, and I will say
influenced.
one of the greatest descriptions of this book I've ever seen, and I'm kind of disappointed in myself for not having made this connection before. I saw it on an Instagram post. Somebody compared Between Two Fires to The Last of Us meets Elden Ring, and I think that's just absolutely perfect.
Well, I was going to say, I think I would bet money that Buellman had played Dark Souls.
Probably.
And
because it's very Dark Souls.
Or
at the very least, there are both
very
points and very similar.
It feels like I played Dark Souls and was thinking about that when this. And I've not played Dark Souls, but I know enough about it to feel that way. But
there's some distinct similarities to the feel, even if it's just them being inspired by the same
Tomas
thing.
is not really a Joel, though, because Joel is like, I feel like actually a bad guy who then...
I don't know. Tomas is a pretty bad guy
I don't
start
think
with.
so.
We just don't see him being bad, but he describes being pretty bad.
Well, the thing is,
Tomas
does redeem himself, and Joel doesn't.
Yeah, or I mean, you can make
not in that way. Like, I mean, Tomas picks up the whole like knighthood thing again.
Well, no, you're right there.
And his motivation is.
Joel.
They say
is not
Tomas's
about
Joel is
description is
only
I was
motivated
more
by
okay.
her.
Joel's not trying to redeem
His
himself.
only motivation, he's not.
I guess we don't see it.
But Tomas
from it.
suddenly does because he's inspired, and maybe it's because she would want him to. But at the same time, he does eventually kind of take that as his own motivation. You know,
Ellie's also not like very Christ-like, as opposed to Delphine.
Not in the same.
As much as I love Ellie deeply,
sure.
But I mean, Tomas is, so when we meet him at the beginning of the story,
Traveling with brigands.
he's part of a group of brigands. He's turned to brigandage. We later find out he's been stripped of it. His title has been stolen. His wife has been taken by another man willingly. His lands have been taken, and he's been excommunicated, meaning for anyone not steeped in church lore, that he's been stripped of his ability to go to heaven, regardless of his own baptism or anything. The church has stripped him of that, and he will go to hell when he dies.
What was the reasoning for it again?
And they say
revenge.
they just wanted to take his land.
Yeah.
They say
why
it's just
go the
to take his
extra?
stuff.
Why?
So according to the book, he didn't do anything. He didn't deserve it at all, and they just did
They
it.
just decided to.
They just decided it to take to
How
give
very Christian of them.
to give his castle to somebody else or his lands to somebody else, and then but also practically, obviously, you're stripped of going to heaven or whatever. But which honestly, I don't remember. Obviously, I guess if you were cast out from the church, then there you go. But you were not allowed to associate with someone who was excommunicated.
Right.
You couldn't do business with them. You couldn't do anything with them.
So
the effects of it were actually very practical. So you did not have to, unless you could find someone. And the one benefit of those times where you could just kind of go somewhere and say I'm somebody else.
Yeah, just become a different person completely.
But you obviously are then starting over, and that's going to be bad and hard. But he doesn't do that, and then that's where you become an outlaw. And
the 100 Years' War has happened. He fought in the Battle of Crécy, which was a massive defeat for the French. He's one of the knights that charged the English line uphill and was just bombarded with arrows and decimated.
Yeah.
And then it's also the start of the Black Death. So there's not a whole lot of options, and he becomes a murderer and a thief to survive. But then he and the remains of this band that haven't caught the plague and died yet are taking shelter in this barn. They've found a donkey, and they're eating it. And a little girl appears, and that we later find out is Delphine. And the leader of the band of brigands has some evil intentions, and eventually Tomas stands up and kills the other members of his band, all but one.
All but one, yeah.
He does a lot to him,
and rescues Delphine, and it's then that she gets him to agree to help her. He, of course, it's the trope. He's happens to be going south anyways, and he plans on dropping her off at the first family or the first convent that he finds. The only problem being that everywhere that they pass, everyone's dead.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they reach this small village where one of the only survivors that they encounter is this priest, Père Mathieu, who takes them in and tells them about this monster that's been attacking the town that lives in the river. And he appeals to Tomas's knighthood, and Tomas agrees to go and fight this monster and try to kill it. The river monster, again, having watched other things since reading it, the book the first time, it reminded me a lot of the mutated salamander creature from Fallout from the show.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Even to the if I remember correctly, the salamander thing, when it opened its mouth, a lot of the little tendrils and stuff were human hands.
Yeah, I was feeling. Yeah.
So it that I don't know if that creature was inspired at all by this, or again just similar tracts, similar thought patterns. Of course, this is more of an eel, and kind of an eel creature than a salamander. But a really cool monster battle, and our first kind of monster horror episode in the book. But Tomas gets fucked up in the process, and one of our first like really genuinely creepy moments happens directly after that, where a woman who is dying of the plague and is reached the state where she's completely out of her mind, leaves her home and finds Tomas lying on the riverbank, and she sees this handsome knight lying there. Her husband is dead. She takes her husband's ring and puts it on Tomas's finger and says that she'll marry him and gives him like a French kiss.
Yeah, nice.
As
With
she's
the plague.
riddled with plague, and then strips her clothes off and lays on his back and dies. And so, surprise, surprise, Tomas ends up with the plague as well as the shit kicked out of him by this demon monster. But he survives, and they are able to find a cart. And I'm skipping a bunch of stuff because there are a lot of like you said, there's a lot of little moments that happen around our characters as they make this journey south to Avignon. Then, and please stop me if there's anything that you guys wanted to address specifically as we're going through the story. But the next part that really stood out to me that we've mentioned was the night court. And on their journey, it's about nightfall, and our trio is approached by this, I believe, a squire or a young herald, who invites them to this castle that's just off the road, and says that there's a tournament that night if Tomas, being a knight, wants to participate and come to the feast, and if you're going to be at the feast, you have to participate in the tournament. And Tomas thinks that's a great idea. Père Matthew, who is a drunk, is very excited about the idea of some wine, but Delphine flat out refuses to go. To the point where she climbs a tree out of everybody's reach and will not come down, and absolutely refuses to set foot in the castle. Which is wise, and I believe that the castle is the first time that we are introduced to this character of this knight with a lion-like face.
Yeah,
like the supernatural part.
Who becomes a recurring character as we move along, but very specifically has that kind of leonine features to his face.
Yeah.
It's pretty evident that nothing about what's happening is right. They're eating monkey brains.
It's the best thing they've ever tasted, they keep saying.
Yeah, and there has to be music playing at all times, and it's one of those kind of
it's just zany and off.
It's every single thing is off. Like nothing is immediately like evil happening, but everything is off. But they're so starved for food, literally, so starved for any sort of pre-plague normalcy that they just kind of go along with it.
So what if it's monkey brains? It's yummy.
Yeah. Well, and there's I think there's some eels that are served at one point that skeeves him out, and there's weird references to this eel fight that he just had that like nobody at that castle should have known about.
Yeah.
And then later during the tournament, I believe there's a reference to this white hand, which is a very, very specifically called out on the river monster. There's this white hand on the end of his tail. That again is also another kind of recurring motif with these demons, and that's kind of when Tomas starts figuring out that something definitely is wrong
at this place.
Not just morally wrong, but spiritually wrong. And sure enough, as soon as the sun rises, it all disappears, and he finds a plague pit with the bodies of a lot of the people that he was associating with that night, and including one that he sleeps with, the Lord's daughter, and he sees her back in the plague pit. Which, there you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gross.
Very
Talk about
gross.
Trippy dream.
Yeah. And it is kind of left up to quite like, did this happen? Did this not happen? Because Tomas
Or these
he gets
animated
hurt
bodies,
again.
or yeah.
He gets hurt again in this tournament, even to the point of broken bones, I believe. And
Fighting a zombie.
and then when he's when he wakes up, all of those hurts are gone.
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of like, did it actually happen, like a lot of the other demonic things that we see later on in the story, or was this some weird hallucination dream thing?
Yeah. Could be.
And from there, kind of the next big beat is the first part of the journey that Delphine has them on is not first to Avignon, but they have to stop at Paris. They have to get something in Paris.
Yep.
She doesn't, and that's one of my favorite things with her character, and what made me kind of think. I don't know. I'm not gonna say I buy anybody that immediately said that she was, the second coming.
Sure.
Because I was still, especially my first read through, I was very much still in the point of like, this is a Joan of Arc kind of character, whereas this young girl who's being spoken to by angels and told what to do, because she knows that she has to get something from Paris, but she doesn't know what.
Right.
And so they arrive at Paris. Paris is a shit show, kind of as we talked about earlier with the catacombs and everything. Like, it's a very bad place to be. They get pretty immediately cheated out of a lot of money trying to find a place to stay. Some thugs convince them to buy this room.
Yeah.
They get the key and they open the door and it's full of dead people.
Yeah.
So, but they eventually find a way to, they are welcomed into a home of this, I think recently childless couple. The husband is a wood carver who specifically carves saints and statues of the Virgin Mary. And they're welcomed in and they're fed and given a place to stay. And the next day they go out to the marketplace, and there they find this Jewish man who is selling relics. And Delphine is immediately drawn to him, and to one object in particular, which we later find out is the spear.
The Spear of Destiny.
Yeah, the Spear of Destiny, the spear that killed Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And there's a great description later, because a lot of times it is presented as like this, spear with like a big leaf-shaped blade or something. And it's, it's just a very thin, and the way it's described in the book is this very thin with a little point at the end.
Yeah.
And she remembers the word pilum, I think, which is the name of those that type of Roman spear, which is what a Roman soldier would have used.
And the name of the publisher for J.B. Jackson's books.
Hey, yeah, we love Pilum Press. Yeah, 100%. It takes her. There's some shenanigans that happens before she is able to get a hold of the spearhead.
Isn't that when the statue fight happens?
Yes. So this is one of my favorite parts, and one that I was excited to talk to you guys about, because it reminded me very much of another beloved scene in another beloved book. So when they're taken in by this couple, they are told, don't go out at night. If you hear knocking at the door, don't answer, because there's things that have been going around and knocking on doors, and anybody that lets them in is killed.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the way that Delphine ends up getting the spear is by going out after dark and rescuing this, insisting on rescuing this Jewish man who has been pilloried.
And they hate him because he's Jewish for some reason.
Yeah, which is another, it's just another thing that was happening in Europe in the Middle Ages.
Was it?
Oh, yeah.
Dang, I didn't realize.
Yeah. No, that's 100% accurate. Yeah. But
How long have we been hating Jews, man? That sucks.
Forever, dude. Yeah. No, it's very shitty. But they get back just before the knocking starts happening in the neighborhood. And the knocking eventually gets to the door. And this being outside ends up adopting the scream of an infant and a woman begging for help.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman that has of the couple that has let them stay with them is distraught because of what has happened to her own child, that she opens the door and they're standing there is this statue of this 6 foot plus tall statue of the Virgin Mary holding a dead plague baby that is screaming and comes in and proceeds to try to kill everybody.
Yep.
But again, on the read through, one thing this reminded me very much of was the Alzabo scene.
Yeah, definitely.
In Sword of the Lictor.
Absolutely.
Not a 1-to-1 comparison, but it felt very. The Alzabo scene was kind of the only scene in the Book of the New Sun that felt horrific.
Yeah, like horror. Yeah.
Felt very tense in that way, and similar vibes. And we've discussed this with Wizard Night specifically, but I have to imagine that Christopher Buehlman has read
some of it.
Yeah.
So
I would
which
think
is something
so.
I would very much like to discuss with him.
So interesting.
It's funny, in that same thing I listened to where they were like, if you close read, you can see what Delphine is. They were like, yeah, and there's a scene and it's like the bear from Annihilation, and it's like, yeah, that bear from Annihilation is just literally Alzabo ripped off, which is fine. But yeah.
But that's funny, kind of.
It's not even in the Annihilation.
I haven't seen Annihilation.
Making the
it's
reference.
It's a pretty good movie. It's a pretty good movie, but yeah, there's not Jeff Vandermeer's good author, but he wrote the book is quite different than the movie. But they added a scene where there's a talking bear that talks in the voices of the people it's eaten.
Oh,
and it's just the
Alzabo. The skin
it's
and
like,
everything is peeled off.
It's like mangled.
Head.
It's a mangled bear. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's honestly what I was thinking about when we read the Alzabo scene.
Yeah, and it almost doesn't even have anything to do with the rest of the movie. It's just this like one scene basically. It sort of relates,
just
but it's
put an Alzabo in it.
But it's not a part of the book, and it
Why
is
not?
literally I think the filmmakers did confirm eventually that they were
riffing.
They were riffing and ripping off Gene.
That's so funny. That the statue scene, like it actually just reminded me of that one Conan short story where they fought those statues in that weird temple. That's all I can think of.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they even described like the dark like iron sort of bronzy what's quartz almost like. I forget how they described it in Conan, and in this story it's a little bit vague, but they seemed very similar. Something that should not be able to move is moving fluidly and also impervious to any sort of weaponry. Yeah. Unless it's the freaking spear of destiny.
Right. Well, what's cool is, I've been very fortunate to spend a significant amount of time in Paris, and the idea of some of those, medieval era sculptures either on the the facades of these cathedrals or in now in museums coming to life, and I mean I love the way that he describes that this encounter is very chilling as well. He describes it very as the movement is very jerky. It's almost like the statue is moving very fast, so it almost appears in different places and different positions. It's not moving like you would expect it to. And at one point, Tomas breaks off one of its feet, and he describes it, getting down on all fours essentially and charging like a bull, because she has the crown on her head and she's impaling people on this crown. Just very chilling.
Yeah.
And then the building gets caught on fire. Delphine, Matthew, and Tomas are able to escape, and they're in their cart and they're fleeing Paris. They've got the spear. That's what they needed to do in the city. And they have another encounter with these statues. I assume it's close enough to daylight that the statues can't move around.
Yeah.
But they pass this churchyard full of these statues, and they're holding dead bodies.
Like on them, yeah.
specifically a couple of them of children, and presumably of people that they've killed that evening.
Yeah.
And they communicate to each of the three in their head. And it's one of these kind of writer things that I really like the way that he formatted it, where these demons are screaming at them in their heads. And Bielman wrote it with like all caps and no punctuation. So it's like just this assault of vile,
stream of consciousness,
evil, stream of consciousness, kind of just assault on their senses as they're driving the cart past this churchyard. I thought that was, from like a technical standpoint, I thought that was very well written.
Cool,
So they proceed. They have a couple of tense moments coming up after that, where first Tomas and then a little bit later Père Matthew are essentially possessed in their dreams.
Yeah.
And in their dreams, where it's not related at all, but in their dreams these demons trying to get them to kill Delphine, and in Tomas's case, to rape her and then kill her.
Yeah.
And they both fight it off.
Yep.
And the demons have to take different tacts going forward. But one of my favorite sections of the book that is kind of the next big set piece, I think, is the flagellants. And
the German guy?
Yeah, referencing back to last podcast on the left, one of their episodes about the Black Death is specifically devoted to the flagellants, which was this sect that started in Germany. They still exist.
Yeah.
You can look up a bunch of wild videos. There's a lot of them in the Philippines. Every Easter, that like they'll straight up crucify dudes, and the whipping themselves and everything, with thorns and with whips with glass in it and things. And it existed after the plague as well, but it was a phenomenon during the plague of these sects of zealots that went roaming around, and there was also almost an entertainment factor.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because you had these groups of crazies coming to your town and performing these,
mutilating themselves,
these whipping. I mean, but it was almost like a dance performance in some ways, because they'd be literally whipping themselves into a fervor. And to this almost state of ecstasy, which is, so they're essentially this is a group of half-naked people out in the middle of your street doing this bizarre BDSM
You're
ritual.
gonna watch that, yeah.
But claiming that by doing that they were appeasing God and protecting themselves and the towns that they went to.
I mean, as you do when you're doing BDSM,
yeah,
right?
As you do. Yeah, that's the whole point. I thought, protect yourself from the plague. I really enjoyed Bielman's take on it.
Yeah, it was interesting.
In fact, this was yet another one of these demonic bands roaming the countryside.
Yep.
The Lion Knight makes another appearance in here, and comes the closest he's come to taking Delphine. But most of the flagellants themselves are actually dead.
Right.
They're undead, that have been raised, and Delphine, through her touch, I don't want to say kills them again, but like lets their souls rest.
Yeah, because I don't remember when it's revealed, but you read the part 1. Each section of the book, and there are 5 parts, opens with another one of those.
Those kind of
those things,
passages,
and I think it probably is the third one where it's like the demons can't make life, but they can reanimate dead things, and it
Right.
which is why and Mangle, and which is interesting because it's basically Tolkien.
Sure.
It's basically
The creation of the orcs.
the orcs and
Yeah.
the dragons and the things. And so you've got the reveal that the river monster is this thing that demons have made.
And they're making a bunch more. Another Berserk thing kind of reminded
Yeah.
me of that one massive panel in Berserk of that giant cobra monster thing that's
Right.
just roaming around that we never see again.
We don't ever see it again.
But like we get that reference there of they've been
Yeah.
making these monsters and loosing them
Yes.
on the countryside. And
Yes.
and Delphine references at one point like we're not going to go to Rhone because there's
Yeah.
monsters in Rhone. So
Yeah.
we're not going to go there.
Yeah, so it's definitely all getting worse and more intense, and with all this fake, nasty, undead life. But I will say, I did find to minorly backtrack, I thought the Tomas Delphine scene was probably the most upsetting thing in the book.
Sure.
Where he like almost
almost
does it?
like almost bordering on gratuitous. Almost, I was like almost like mad he included it, but mostly because they do just kind of brush right past it, which I guess in the end sort of makes sense. But either way, it was
yeah.
really
Her level
hard.
of like forgiveness was uncomfortable.
That being said, I think that's
Because she was like,
the
"Oh,
point.
it's
She's
okay.
Jesus,
you didn't do it. You stopped it." It's like
Yeah, I know.
it just felt so.
She's got Jesus inside of her, so that's like the whole. She's two people,
She's
so
Christ-like level.
Yeah,
of-
it does.
of-
It does
ability
have
to
the
forgive.
similar tone of like a woman in an abusive relationship, like
Yeah.
just
No, I
stomaching
know.
it kind of
Yeah.
thing. It did feel like that to me. Like, oh, it's
because you get to the point in it, she's like unclothed and everything, and it's
yeah.
it's
At
just,
that point,
it's
that
really
I would
uncomfortable.
consider that a violation already. Like
Oh, for
just
sure.
ripping her clothes off.
For
like,
sure.
Yeah, like that's not.
And the description of the dream he's having was very interesting, though. And I did feel like it was really well done dream imagery, and then obviously when you come back into the real life, it's just like, oh my god. But
yeah, well, because in the dream he's trying to get this
fruit.
this fruit,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
very sweet fruit from this patch of thorns,
Yeah.
and he fights through it.
Yes, he decides
Um,
not to. But
And I think that's and it's horrible and it's evil.
sure.
And I think it I can definitely see it bordering on gratuitous, but I think it's I think that I think it was that same interview that I listened to with Buellman where talking about not liking demons that are easily defeated by humans, and then I think also like not liking demons that aren't just like if they're gonna be demons,
Make them do evil
they
shit.
need
Yeah.
to it needs to be evil.
Sure.
So, but it doesn't make it less uncomfortable.
No, for sure. Obviously, and then he's like got one in his like head, and he like kicks
Yeah,
out
it's
the
physically
like
in his head, and
yeah,
he talks about he
Snorts it out.
sneezes,
Yeah.
which is a plague thing, the sneeze, and he physically ejects this
Yeah.
black sludge demonic creature physically from his head.
yeah.
So it was like a physical and not just a spiritual
Yeah.
possession.
Exorcism.
But no, I do think you're right. It is he's possessed, or partially possessed in this scene. So but then just putting the hero in that position and
It's tricky.
potentially doing violence to both a young girl who's his ward and the person. It's icky. But that being said, it doesn't happen. And
Well, and I will say, I think that the point is to be icky. I don't think it's. I don't
No,
think
of
you're
course not.
supposed to have any other feelings for it than that.
no.
I think it's definitely supposed to be icky.
Oh,
No,
so,
and
yeah,
again,
that's the
we
point.
don't need like a whole like lecture afterwards. But it was it did feel like, at least just for me reading it, it just like we just breeze. It just like we move on really quickly, and that's what it's just like oof. Like I don't know. But that being said, I bad things happening in books are cool. That being said, we've also talked a lot about the flagellants and we're moving on when I brought that back up. But which that scene is really interesting, and it's one of the more darkly humorous parts of the book.
For sure.
The like German guy leading the group is pretty funny.
Yeah, no, it is. There is an element of humor to it because it is so over the top.
Yes.
That an impulse is to just to laugh at it because it's so extreme that it's hard to take seriously, even though they're taking it so very.
Well, yeah,
seriously.
and there's a sect going around. They're like, if a village someone will willingly have themselves crucified, that'll do the plague. And there's a dwarf man who's being crucified, and they try to get him down. He's like, "What are you doing? Let me!
Yeah.
I'm saving my village.
Yeah.
Don't let me down."
Which is sad.
It's very sad.
It's funny,
Yeah.
but it's also it is sad, truly.
Although he said he had to be up there for 3 days, and then if he
made it,
he
like,
could.
good to
Yeah, it was
go.
weird. Yeah.
And
definitely.
Tomas rightly points out, like, what makes you think that they won't just leave you tied up here just to make sure.
Sure. Yeah. Not good.
But after the flagellants, kind of the next big set piece is the river.
Yes.
I
I did have a funny thought about it.
And we meet the order of what do they call themselves? The order of Peter.
Peter, Paul, and Mary.
No, the fisher. They're the fishers of men, but they have the Brotherhood of Saint Peter or something.
Yeah.
But they're
It's one of the
essentially
more
they're
peaceful-
piters,
one of
they're
the-
pirates
One of the more peaceful moments in the book.
for a moment. But they're river pirates essentially, and they book passage with them.
Oh yeah, those
to get
guys.
further down
Yeah,
the
that's
river.
right.
And Captain Walleye.
So, my funny thing from this book is the pirates and Tomas and Delphine are all talking, and there's a moment where someone says something about because of Adam's fall, we're dealing with all this, and then they were like, "Well, my priest told me it was because of Eve's fall," and they're like, "Yeah," and then Delphine's like, "Well, Adam's sin was greater." Because he was tempted by something lesser than him.
Yeah, that was so funny.
And while Eve was tempted by something greater. So that led me down thinking a lot about the serpent and the way we've decided it's the devil, and led me down an interesting wormhole reading about the way the serpent is talked about in Revelation, which a lot of people actually think that's the Leviathan, based on there's like to say for certain that the serpent is meant there. Obviously, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of parallels there, the tempter and everything. But the thing I was reading, I was like, wait, so Eve is lesser than Adam? And I was like, that's the message, and coming to us from a mouth of authority in Delphine. But I thought that was. And I don't know if that was like that's what you think. You think Eve is lesser, or I was just like, wait a minute, what are we actually doing here?
If I remember
Are we
correctly,
saying that women are lesser than men?
well, I think that was,
It kind of sounds like that.
but that was my interpretation of what she was saying too. Is like you guys obviously think
She was like,
it was kind of the.
I guess,
it was
and
the
then maybe
Obi-Wan-
that's what it was.
It was the
but-
Obi-Wan Kenobi thing of who's the greater fool, the fool or the fool who follows him.
Sure.
It's like if by your logic,
Yeah.
Eve is the weaker one, then that means that Adam's sin is the greater.
This led me down the thought though of what if.
she meant it
Well,
literally.
two thoughts. It was two thoughts really. What if Adam didn't eat the apple? What happens? She eats it. He brings it back. Hey,
And he's like,
eat this.
fuck
And I
that.
go, "You say
No.
that way." He's like, no, dude, we weren't supposed to eat that.
That's evil
She's like,
shit.
dude, I already ate it. And he's like, I'm not.
I guess
we
we'll
just
take
get, like, a
I guess
new-
we'll take my
Is
other
there just a
rib.
new
I
Eve?
guess that just means Adam is not ride or die.
Yeah. No, well, that's one. Is there do we just get rid of Eve and we make a new Eve, or does she go and
I mean,
he stay?
taken from rib. He's got
got
8
more.
of them.
There's
He's
more
got more
ribs.
ribs.
Although
for
I have
lunch.
heard some interesting thoughts that
Well,
should actually
technically,
be
okay, hold on.
That should actually be tail,
Isn't
but-
wasn't Lilith supposed to be Adam's first wife?
There is no Lilith.
I understand that there's no Lilith, but like, isn't she the? I think that she's supposed to be Adam's first wife. So I think if that were the case, and
Who is Lilith?
then God would be like,
I mean-
hey, no, man,
No,
like,
that's three's too many.
Come on,
Oh,
this is starting
this-
to become a you problem,
Well,
Adam.
it's not this.
What's the
proper
common
thought.
denominator here,
Well,
Adam?
too though, it did was
What's
like
the common denominator?
it did make me wonder though, especially with this whole like lesser greater. I was like, did Eve show up with the apple? She eating it, and Eve's like, Adam's like, oh,
God, you got me.
okay, all right. I'll eat it.
I wanted to eat it, too.
Well, not even that, but like, I'm not letting you go down alone. You know?
I mean, if that's
was
the
it
deal,
actually
like,
a
hey,
noble?
yeah,
was
hell
it
yeah, ride or die,
Was it
let's do
noble?
it.
Was
Yeah.
it noble?
Oh
Maybe.
my God, noble,
Maybe.
noble dark, right there.
I'm just saying. We don't know.
Fantastic throwback.
Adam was like,
We don't know.
"All right, we're going down together, baby." It was like the sugar, we're going down
Yeah.
moment.
Interestingly, though, that reminded me, because we're talking the biblical allusions, the Belial, when it mentioned we fell because of the
Yeah.
we fell because of men. That's Islam, which is funny.
Sure.
That's the Islamic myth, and it was interesting. People have said that story's gotten more popular, but it's and maybe there are other traditions that do that whole. It's the story of, and God took Adam, and all the angels should bow before Adam, and then that's when Satan's like, I'm not bowing. That man's puny. I'm not doing that. And then that's alleged. That's their story of the fall, which we don't get at all. The angels' fall. We don't get it all in the Bible, which is interesting. But yeah, I thought that was
Well,
interesting.
I think he's definitely playing with, the Abrahamic religion as a whole.
Sure.
In one of those later passages in the kind of the biblical interludes, it mentions fomenting wars between the Christians and the Turks.
Yes.
Crusade references. I want a bunny trail for a sec. Something that we haven't talked about yet, but that's a fascinating addition to this story. Is that it's referenced very directly a couple of times, but it's not ever like fully explored. But a great little bit of world building for the story is the reference that Delphine's father was a Cathar.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring that up too.
Yeah, so for the unfamiliar, the Cathars were a kind of Gnostic sect of Christianity that arose in the Languedoc region of the south of France. We've been to several Cathar castles. They made some kick-ass castles. Carcassonne, which is still relatively intact medieval walled city in the south of France. Last Tours, a series of a group of 4 keeps on this mountain range. I've been to a few others, and the names are escaping me, but they were a very peaceful, for the most part, group. On the extremes of their religion, they were very similar to the Shakers here in the States, as far as kind of the end goal of the religion being to let go of all worldly pleasures, including procreation. But because of the kind of Gnostic bent of this sect, they were declared heresy, and the Pope actually declared a crusade. And it is, to my knowledge, the only crusade the church ever declared on European soil. So there was an actual crusade in the south of France. Only a little, maybe I'm blanking on the dates, but not long before this book in the early 14th century, I believe.
One thing that's funny, I was looking into Cathars because they had some general sort of Gnostic stuff. Some of their thing was that there was like a angel living inside of you was one of their beliefs or something, and they were trying to get that out or get that to be more alive in you or whatever. But one of the things that's funny, if you just read the Wikipedia page, they get down to the bottom. They're like, there's some people think the Cathars didn't even exist.
Right.
And that it basically
was
that
a fun idea.
there were because the thought being there's very little first sources of their like writings and ideologies, and that we have everything we have is like very secondhand, with the idea being that they announced a crusade on these people, did create tracts and information about these people being bad, but it was basically just this group of people they wanted to kill, and like the Cathars name was just like made up.
Well, I think that
which I read that. I don't think there. I think that's probably
yeah,
wrong,
it's
but it was
wrong.
But it was one of those funny things where I was like, that's really that's kind of funny.
That's a kind of a conspiratorial take on a thing where I mean there is a conspiracy there. It's kind of one of those conspiracy theories where it's like you don't need a conspiracy theory for this. It's like the Cathars had control of some incredible land, and France was expanding south as the English were invading in the north, and there you have it.
Yeah.
And also there's some weird like kind of CIA creation event where the Crusades against the Cathars are one of the things that prompted the creation of the Inquisition, which directly ties into the creation of the CIA. So it's like anyways, it's a fascinating bunny trail, fascinating subject. My dad's been doing a whole lot of research on the Cathars recently, so maybe we'll get him on for an episode at some point to deep dive into that. But yeah, really cool addition and detail that that is the realm that Delphine came from. And obviously her, you could presume that her father probably fled those crusades, considering that Delphine is Norman. She's born in Normandy when the Cathars were all down in the south of France.
Right.
So fun little detail there. But so back to our little river cruise. Things are kind of happy-go-lucky for a little while. They rob a few other ships on the river.
That's right.
But they have some nice moments too, of like some music playing and Delphine singing and dancing, and them having kind of another little brief glimpse of kind of normalcy. But that all falls apart when the captain finds their stash of money and wants it for himself, and a fight ensues, and one of the other crew members, who has become good friends with Tomas because he also was at the Battle of Crécy, sides with them, but Delphine begs Tomas not to kill anybody. Tomas does kill the captain and everyone else. And it's one of those moments where it's like, I'm not quite sure how he doesn't.
Right.
But the killing of him seems to attract another one of these monsters to their position.
Right.
Yeah.
And they are attacked by this kind of vaguely man-o'-war kind of jellyfish demon.
Yeah.
And Tomas, Père Mathieu, and Delphine make it to shore. But Père Mathieu is mortally wounded in the act of carrying Delphine and keeping her out of the water. And dies a day later in a cabin that they're staying at. So he finds some redemption before the end.
And Delphine wants to bring him back to life, but then an angel says she's not strong enough.
Yeah, which is interesting.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting.
From there,
it's essentially we get to Avignon, but they get
basically,
there at different
Tomas
times.
does a little side quest to go back to his castle first.
Tomas, well, he doesn't go all the way back to his castle. He meets
the Lord or whatever.
the
Compton.
fucker that took his place. Took his wife and took his place, and
an attractive 25-year-old.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of how it read.
and he can't really help himself but challenge him to a duel. And
But it caught him at a good time.
Caught him at a good time. He kicks his ass.
Obviously, yeah.
And then they're attacked by some English
at the end, yeah,
routiers,
messes it up.
some English bandits that kill everybody else, but because of Delphine's voice in his head, Tomas hadn't killed these English guys.
Yeah.
So they let him live. And I wasn't able to find it, so I want to say I think that this is probably a pretty deep cut historical figure. He names the leader of this English band in the book, and I haven't been able to find that. I've also, because of reasons we discussed, have not had a bunch of extra time to deep dive into that. But I want to say that's probably that character is probably a reference
guy,
to another book, maybe, or
Okay.
a real guy that's like a real deep historical deep cut.
Actual English.
Which
brigand.
either way, that's cool. But an important detail in that fight is that he ends up eventually taking the through Delphine's help. He ends up taking the armor and the face and body of the young Comte that he kills in this fight, and in their fight, Tomas with an axe delivers a very powerful blow that dents the chest piece of this very beautiful Italian armor that the young Comte is wearing, which later ends up being a reason that Tomas gets mortally wounded because of the structural integrity of the armor being lost.
Compromise, yeah.
But eventually, in disguise, Tomas and Delphine, they meet back up and they make it to Avignon, where the Pope is, and where Père Matthew's brother, who is also in the priesthood, is. Yeah. And he is the lover of a cardinal. And they are trying to get access to the Pope, and they're trying to get access to the Pope through this young priest. And they think to convince him to their side by Delphine taking him to this vineyard where all of the papal wine is being created at night. And we find out that this wine, that there's been some little references of the wine seeming a little off, having a little off flavor recently, is being picked and then, more importantly, stomped and pressed by zombies. More of these demonically raised dead people, and thus the kind of
off
taste of rot that's been in the last couple vintages.
That's a zombie foot.
Yeah,
that's what that is.
But this young fella is too concerned with his station, too scared, I guess, to be able to allow himself to break free of his position and help them get to the Pope. And he tells on him. He fucking rats on him. And Delphine manages to escape, but Tomas is, in fact, I think an angel grabs her and takes her out of
That's
the
right, yeah. And he
castle.
gets like tortured and shit.
Tomas is captured and he is tortured, and essentially his body that he is inhabiting, which is not his own, dies essentially.
Yeah.
And he is put back into his own body as Tomas.
I think we skipped over my favorite scene too.
Well, let's talk about it.
I really loved. It's when we actually see the first two actual demons, the six-winged demon.
Yeah, so that's all the way back in. Back in at the end of the flagellants. So the flagellants, Delphine starts releasing all of these dead creatures, and the lion-headed demon that we encountered again on the road to the flagellants makes another appearance trying to find her.
Yep.
And a battle between him and an angel starts, and we see this lion demon being six-winged and six-arms, meaning from the lore of angels set forth with like Thomas Aquinas and Pseudo-Dionysus. He is a seraphim, a fallen seraphim, which is the highest order of angels, the highest choir of angels. So continue.
But now, it's just really well described. The action is very evocative, and the way it actually reminded me in a like a negative alternate version of the way C.S. Lewis describes the angelic beings in the second book of the Space Trilogy, where you're like seeing something that's like you shouldn't be able to see, but then like he describes that when you see them, like you feel like they're off, but that they're right and you're wrong. But this was like the alternate where he's seeing something you shouldn't be seeing, but it's like the way he describes his brain barely being able to like comprehend it. I just thought it was really cool. Yeah, and it
When he also
and it kind of comes up with what we're about to talk about too. So
he kind of describes it too, almost as like the start of it kind of being like two tornadoes appearing and and fighting each other.
Yep.
Before they eventually like kind of take off the ground and are fighting in the air. But you're right. It's a brilliant scene in a couple different levels. It's brilliant because it's fun to read and it's very evocative and really holds your attention and draws you in.
Mm-hmm.
But it does also set up the escalation of what this angel versus demon fight here in the climax of the story.
Yes.
Where Tomas and Delphine have confirmed because of the zombie vintners and other things that have been going awry that the Pope is in fact has been replaced by
he's a body double.
He's Beelzebub.
Yeah, and Delphine found
he's a clone.
Yeah.
It's QAnon.
But the real Pope has been stashed in a cask of wine.
Yeah.
Delphine found him, rescued him, and has brought him back. And Tomas,
some like weird Civil War
in a
stuff.
sacrificial way, sacrifices himself to kill the Beelzebub Pope.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He is then torn apart by the lion demon.
Yep.
And Delphine is split open.
Yes.
And killed, presumably.
By angels.
But her death physically opens a portal for the angelic forces to essentially go directly from heaven
and kick
into
ass.
The war on earth.
Isn't this where it says and the Lord had answered
yes.
or something?
Yeah. And then a truly awesome
ass kicking
fight between the angels and demons continues as Tomas is dying and witnessing this.
Yep.
And the angels win.
It would almost be cheesy, but the way he writes it is so not cheesy.
Sure. Yeah.
Of like, you know, I mean, it's the archangel, like Michael and Gabriel, like just coming to kick ass. Of course they would, but the way he wrote it was great.
There's one interesting moment where he says, and two angels went down with a demon,
in the water.
And then 3 come up.
Yeah.
And then there's just one line, redemption's possible even for angels. And you're like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. That was a nice moment.
Guess they're back now.
It's like they
went down and they're like
cleaned it.
Okay, sorry, bro. All right, you know it's fine. Come on.
Oh man, what was I doing?
That's an important bit for what's coming up.
Sure.
Because Tomas dies.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And Tomas goes to hell.
Yes.
And spends an eternity there.
Yes, an eternity until his ego and his previous self is
cleansed or something.
Yeah, which is I don't know. It's a very interesting look at that belief in hell.
Yeah, so it would really be more purgatory, but also I don't know. But the way they describe the suffering is very
it's a very Eastern kind of idea too, of like a concept of hell being more of a place of not rebirth, but cleansing yourself of the thing, and then he's given the option to leave.
Yeah.
eventually by Delphine, and he takes it.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, Delphine shows up and does another.
But you could see versions of this where more evil, like people that were truly evil in life,
Could like come back
would
somehow. Yeah.
or would refuse it
Yeah.
and would stay in that place.
Just pride or something.
But Tomas accepts and he leaves.
Yeah.
But as you referenced earlier, Sam, it's a chilling depiction.
Well, yeah, and it's like his skin
he
ripped
said
off
he
and
gets,
resewn
he
on
gets,
all
like,
the time.
raped by the dicks of apostles. Like when I wrote that, I was like, "What in the world?"
Yeah, no,
Like,
it's
First
it's
off,
like,
where did you get the apostle dick? Like, first off, why do you have that? Why do you have multiples of it? And then why do you repeatedly sodomize this guy with them? And then
Yeah.
you cut off his own genitals, and he like is sexless, but is being sexed up the ass like pretty much every day.
But I think the part that you referenced was maybe the most. I don't know if it's the most chilling, but one of the most visceral parts of like being flayed alive
And then having to
drag your
skin.
skin around
Ooh.
until
Yeah.
it's full of gravel and sharp rocks,
And then like
and
sew
then
it back
sewing
on.
it back on.
Yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a kind of again a kind of flagellant idea of like like walking around with rocks in your shoes or something as a penitent kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah, but dragging
To
your
the
skin.
nth degree.
Dragging your skin just as a sentence is like very disarming.
Yeah, and again, very Hieronymus Bosch. Like you could see all of this being, and I think a lot of these things probably are depicted in some of his paintings.
It reminds me of the like little cheesy dream sequence in Berserk,
sure,
where
yeah,
he's walking around with a dog, and he's the dog walking around.
in some
like-
ways, yeah. But
But then, Delphine shows up, does another harrowing of hell, and invites him out.
yeah, and then I find their ending to be very sweet, in a way. They both take orders.
Yeah, it's like father-daughter.
He
Restart.
becomes a Franciscan, and I can't remember what order Delphine becomes
He's
part of.
fond of the Franciscan monks because we actually see a few others show up and they're both good guys.
Yeah.
As well. So he's got a fondness there, but Tomas leaves hell, and the timeline has been basically rewritten. No one remembers or realizes that there were devils and demons doing things. Tomas is actually the only one with any seeming memory of these things.
And it's kind of instant, like it's right after the
Yes.
events. Like he's only been
Yeah.
unconscious
The plague-
for moments.
Yeah, the plague is happened or whatever still, but life has settled down. He's restored to his lands.
Well, and even he's not restored to his lands.
no, you're right. My bad.
He visits, but timeline wise, this is when the plague is kind of this branch of it. It still exists in France, but it's
receding.
played itself out for the most part, and it's traveling north up into England. But yeah, he kind of helps around the around Avignon for a little while. He's looking for Delphine, can't find her at the moment. And then we have a time jump.
Yeah.
Where he has reunited with Delphine. They are father and daughter now.
Yep.
And when she comes of age, she takes orders in a again I can't remember
The nunnery.
the type of nun that she becomes, but she takes orders, and then he becomes a Franciscan, and they see each other. He travels to visit her every month, and at the end of the book, one of his visits, he stops by his home, his old home,
Right.
and he sees his grandson playing, and he sees his wife, and after a brief conversation, they have this nice moment where it's referenced earlier in the book that they had a thing where they would knock 3 times with rings.
Yeah.
And as he's leaving to go see Delphine, his ex-wife
Yeah.
knocks 3 times,
the knock.
and he knocks 3 times back at her, and it's he's happy. He's
Yeah.
not. It's not he's not filled with rage or anger,
unforgiveness, or the
like he would have been previously.
he has been redeemed.
He's been redeemed. So it's a story of redemption.
For sure.
That's Between Two Fires. I love this book very much. You can expect to see it on my list when we redo our top 10 at the end of the year, I think.
Coming up now.
Yeah, we're very close. It's just hard to believe. But, yeah, I'm glad that we read this, and I'm really looking forward to reading Black Tongue Thief next month. I think you guys are really going to dig it. I've read that one when it came out in 21. Super stoked to read it again. I think you guys are going to really dig it.
I'm excited to check it out.
I'm a big fan of Christopher Bielman and Between Two Fires. So this has been another episode of Under Towers Podcasts. I'm Steven.
I'm Daniel.
Sam.
If you enjoyed tonight's episode, please give us a like and a subscribe. Leave us a comment. All of those things cost you nothing and help us with the algorithm. And listen to Horsebread. Listen to Hole Dweller. He does the music at the beginning and the end of our episodes. And we will see you guys next week.
Woohoo!
Bye.